This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Matt Kutz. Want to welcome you to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
It's great to talk to people from around the world. We like to do that. And before we get into the heart of your story, we always ask a couple questions of every guest. One of the questions we ask is, what motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
What motivates me is just the desire to be excellent, the desire to do the best that I can. I've always had the idea that if you're going to be successful in life and overcome the obstacles that life throws your way, you've got to start with being the best that you can be. And that's different from person to person. So, and then of course I'd be silly if I didn't say, a lot of that I do is for my family, my faith, my kids, grandkids, all that fun stuff. What makes life worth living.
So you have a Ph.D. in global leadership, and you're an award-winning author, an award-winning educator, researcher, and speaker. You're also a cancer survivor, and just noted, I'm a cancer survivor. I survived a level 3 sarcoma.
Oh, wow.
When I was 27. I'm 57 now, so I'm somewhat experienced. You had a different, everybody's cancer is different, but I just like to give you a heads up that I kind of come from that experience. But one of the things I always want to talk about is like what made you want to write books and give you like a permission structure that you felt like you had something to say. Because not everybody picks up the pen, becomes an author, becomes a speaker. What made you feel like you had that permission structure to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one thing, I've always wanted to write a book, ever since I was young. I just always admired that and thought that. So that was kind of always there. But specifically, I remember I was probably 20 something. I was in a meeting attending a lecture or something. Like, I don't even remember the details of it, but the person who was speaking said, and I don't know that this is factually true, but it struck me nonetheless. And he made a comment to the point that somewhere around 90 to 95% of people die with a book still inside of them. And I remember, being impacted by that statement. And I do, and this is the truth. I remember making a vow in my heart, like a personal vow in my heart that I'm not going to be one of those people that dies with a book in me, because I want to leave something. So that's started it all. And then, your question was kind of double-sided there, because then it's like, well, what gives you the right to think you have something worth saying? Because a lot of people are like, have neat ideas, but they won't, as you said, pick up the pen, so to speak. And so for me, that had to do with being diligent and faithful in my discipline and study, and earning the academic credentials, which, by the way, doesn't mean that you have anything valuable to say. Trust me when I tell you that. I know plenty of PhDs who ought to keep their mouths shut, but that's a different story. And but at any rate, so I feel as if, or believe as if, I did learn something valuable and did have something to say. So that's part of that story there.
Well, I love talking to creative people. That's what I've been doing on this podcast since 2016. And what I find is like you said, like everybody has that book in them, or they have the film in them, or have that painting in them. Or I'm a musician, they have the song in them. A songwriter, it's a different effort. You can do a song, you can do an album, and there's a lot of artists that have a lot of stuff that they never put out, and so It's kind of like they don't feel they have the permission, or they don't feel it's good enough. They're in that kind of comparison trap.
Yeah, it's a perversion of excellence, I think, because I actually write about this in my book, Becoming Epic. And that's where there's this idea that in order to do anything valuable, it has to be perfect, right? And so especially musicians and creatives, they don't want people to be criticizing their work. So they make sure it's perfect. And I believe that's a mistake. I'm a big fan of Brene Brown and some of the work that she writes and stuff like that. And she has this concept of, she uses, I'm sorry for the language, she uses the phrase shitty first draft. And she says, well, we have to, and then she calls them SFDs. And we have to be able to do that. And so many people don't want to do SFDs. They want a perfect draft before they make it out there. And that's a real hindrance. And I believe that's one of the reasons why. I think the second reason, and this was my problem, is I don't believe people actually think they're creative. And I think there's some kind of pressure that they really believe, well, creative people do these types of things and I don't do those. And for me personally, that was a major obstacle for me early on in my career because I don't sing, or well, I sing, but just to myself because it's horrible. So I'm a horrible singer. I'm not a incredibly gifted dancer at all. I don't paint. I can't draw. I don't play, any musical instruments and all. Those are all the things that people assume creative people do. And so I never thought of myself as creative until I started actually exploring the concept myself and realized, you know what? No, I'm creating words. I am taking and forming ideas with my words, and that is creative. And I've learned a lot just in the past 10 years about that.
Yeah, it's like one of the things I always like when I talk to a lot of authors and other creative people is this idea of like the happy accident
Yeah.
or the kind of flow state type of thing. And you can, like, not that you don't plan things and not that
Right.
you don't have world building or outlines, but a lot of times when you deal with like artists there's a matter of like getting that 10,000 hours in as a writer or any
Right.
kind of creative. Like once you get that work in, there's a certain point where you have to trust yourself. And you got to like know that, like, well, I'm in this, like, the athlete that
Right.
does all the, like, to get that 3-point shot, to do that play, they do all that repetition, but then they still have to run into the team that runs the play that they didn't practice, right? And are they going to freeze, or are
Right.
they going to be able to take that moment and in the moment apply what they've learned and not like lose it?
Right. I mean, that's actually a beautiful point because that's what the best performers do. People see them and they remember the ad libs. They remember did you see that amazing unscripted play that they just did and they improvised it? And, you watch a great comedian, you think the same thing. You've got iconic comedians like Billy Crystal and Robin Williams and people like this who just, their best lines are ad-libbed lines, right? Well,
Yeah.
that's only because of the literal decades
Oh,
of
fact, yeah.
standing in front of stand-up, standing in front of people, getting booed, jokes that fail, the time and time again. And same things with athletes. They don't see, I work a lot with athletes, and what they don't see is all the practice. I mean, they make commercials about it and all that kind of stuff, but they really only see them on the television for, an hour at a
Yeah.
time, maybe two, something like that. But what they don't see is all the prep, all the
All the
practice,
work.
all the
Yeah.
time, all the work. And to truly get into that stage to that state, it takes all that time. And then when you're there, that ad-libbing, that flow state you mentioned just seems to come natural, like they just always could do it, but they couldn't. And it takes a
Yeah.
lot of work. And
It's all everybody thinks you go 0 to 100. It's like
right.
when you think about, like, I always like a good example of like modal jazz or fusion, which
Yeah.
is kind of like Miles Davis's wheelhouse. But he was like the bebop king. They went into fusion, but the whole idea, like something like Kind of Blue, was like his big record, right? And the whole thing of that record was like pretty much all improvisational. They had some sketches, but it's like the kind of landmark of that form.
Yeah.
And it wasn't highly practiced, but everybody in the group was like an amazing artist. You had John Coltrane, Bill Evans, all these great
Oh, wow. Yeah.
jazz. He put all these guys together that were like at the top. And that kind of showed you a type of guy, though. How many people put somebody like equal to them or better than them in the same group?
Very few. It goes back to that point we were just talking about a minute ago of the fear of failure and the fear of having my work criticized prevents a lot of people from surrounding themselves with people better than themselves. And again, that's a critical lesson. And I'm so glad you brought that up because even my own story and different things and the other things that other people have been able to accomplish are able to do that because they're brave enough to let people who are better than them help them.
Yeah,
And
where
that's
you get these,
really
yeah.
cool.
If you think about the great like CEOs and the great entrepreneurs,
Yep.
now they get known as being like the only one, but the real story is that they have a team,
Right.
and they have this team of people that were potentially a lot of them better than they are,
Yep.
right? And they're not, they didn't let the ego get in there, right? Other than maybe the name of the company is their name, but
Right.
the idea that they allowed all these people to have that free flow and step up, right? And allow that to happen. That's kind of like your ego id. You got to let it go a little bit to
You
kind
really
of,
do. You really do. I know that's, to your point too, on the science side of things, and science, a lot of people will argue, that science is a creative industry just because of the research and things they have to do. I know this from having done other just exploratory research for my different writings and articles and journals and things, is there hasn't been a Nobel Prize that's been given to a single individual in physics or chemistry or the mathematics, ever. So those people like Albert Einstein, we always recognize Albert Einstein for, the genius, motif, so to speak. And he certainly was. And, he won the Nobel Prize, but really, no, he had a teams of people that he worked with
yeah,
that, helped him in his labs and his research and all those things, who were brilliant minds. I mean, and we can't forget those things.
yeah,
Most patents are, in tandem,
teams, yeah.
exactly right. Exactly right.
I work in software engineering, and you might
Okay.
have a lead architect, but our team of engineers, there are like hundreds of people, you
Right.
know, and and you can have multiple architects. I'm in an organization right now. We have four architects, so there's not just one. There's multiple,
Right.
and there's multiple disciplines, and it is very left right brain because
Yeah.
people, especially in this world of AI, the theoretical stuff that's going on in computers is art and science. There's a
Right.
lot of stuff that's very much art. And I came from a background that was a liberal arts background, and I got into computers, and I'm not a comp sci guy. I'm not a
Right.
mathematics guy, but I got into the world because you wouldn't think that they would have places for people with like liberal arts degrees. I was a sociology major.
Okay.
But in this modern world, they need people who have different disciplines. And so you might
100%.
not think there's an opportunity because you might think, well, it's a bunch of eggheads. They're all mathematicians, but that's not necessarily the case. So
Right.
some people, like if you could apply for things that maybe are a little bit beyond your wheelhouse and find out they actually have a role.
Yeah. Well, that's great, because one of the spaces that I write in and present and talk on is this idea of cognitive diversity. And you're illustrating that principle and that concept perfectly, because we generally think that the best teams consists of people who have similar backgrounds, similar ideas, similar history. Like you said, they're all mathematicians, or they're all, engineers or something like that. And that's actually the opposite. It's not the case. It's when you start bringing in people who have completely different frames of reference, completely different mental constructs and experiences and backgrounds, and you get those people talking together. All of the sudden, you see problem solving speed increase dramatically, as well as the innovative and creative ideas just begin to flow once you get past a certain sticking point. Because with any team made up of any group of people, there's an initial sticking point. But once you get past that sticking point and everybody's comfortable, all of a sudden you see some incredible outcomes with cognitively diverse teams. And that's
Yeah.
a beautiful illustration you just had.
We find a lot of times it's like in the tech I've been involved in, a lot of neurodivergent people
Yeah.
that don't fit the normal 9 to 5. And some of the, like I work with a startup, and sometimes we've come to understand there's certain people like they work really good 2, 3 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
right? That's where and so they don't fit in the normal time box. And if you're an organization that's more agile,
Yep.
they doesn't say I got to put them in the cube. Like this person could work, they could be living in Germany, they could be in Latvia, they could be in wherever, they could be anywhere on the planet. And if they have that skill set, it's like they don't have to be sitting in front of you,
Right.
to actually utilize them. And because they might communicate in a different way, might be a different language, might be a different culture. But the best organizations understand is like, hey, they reach out to whatever, is needed at the time. It's like whatever serves that project.
Right.
Then it doesn't have to have this paradigm that kind of old world. Like we're not living at the industrial beginning of the industrial age. We're just going to be a cog in the machine. We're in a
Right.
different spot.
You're not wrong. And that's something that, again, some people are just not comfortable with that space. Certain organizations, I work a lot in the healthcare space. You tell somebody in a hospital that they won't be able to, they don't process it very
You
well. But then
process
when
it.
you explain what you just said, though, it's one thing to be, well, the IT people and this people, but the nurses need to be here. But I mean, even that is getting turned on its head with the concepts of telemedicine and
Yeah,
things like that.
telemedicine.
Now
You
that
got
was
people.
never a thing 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I've had virtual. During COVID, I had virtual doctor exams, and my
Right.
companies have still have gone with it, even though people
Yeah.
like to be in person. There's some situations where, I mean, my daughter had like a virtual pet exam for her cat.
Yeah.
And so there are things that they're able to serve people in a way that before they couldn't serve them, because now you have, like, the internet is a wide open space. It's out in the ether.
Huge.
So you could
Huge.
have somebody sitting in Colorado, somebody sitting in London,
Right.
somebody sitting in Indonesia, somebody sitting wherever. And so you can pick, you can serve whatever your client's need is and whatever the time need is, and in a way that you got to really start expanding, like very expansive mindset in this age. To me, is like that's the key, is to not be stuck in your lane.
You can't. Yeah, you absolutely can't. We have this mindset that things work a certain way. Now, I believe that there's even generational things in that. Certain generations have an easier time with that than others. Certain industries certainly have an easier time with that than others. But you're absolutely right. I mean, going back to the healthcare example, I mean, there's things now that you can mail order away, and you can, send you can spit in a tube and send it in a
Yeah, you
package
can
and
take it.
send
They
it
have
away.
kits that you can take your own blood.
Exactly. I mean, the
You
colon, you
can
can
take
do
a blood
colon
exam
screenings now.
that
Yeah. I mean,
you never could do that before, because they like, well, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but they got devices that
yep.
actually take the blood and give it, in a tube, and then you mail it, and you're like, wow, you couldn't do that before.
Right.
But the tech is so, and not everything's tech, but also communication. Um, but that idea of, like, maybe go back to becoming epic is like the idea of like, what does epic mean to you? What does that mean?
Yeah. So epic for me is this idea of four central behaviors. So it's like a mnemonic device where epic actually stands for being excellent, being perceptive, being inspired, and being compassionate. And when
Mm.
you are those four things and practice those four things, then I believe you are becoming epic or living an epic life, depending on how long you've been doing it. But and you can break those apart and develop those mindsets of, okay, what it means to be excellent. A big part, which I kind of alluded to already, is the biggest enemy of excellence is perfectionism. This idea of
Mhm.
being perfect. I have to be perfect. I can't do it. I won't show it. It's not ready yet. And that prevents so many good ideas from getting out there. From a scientific perspective, one of the things that scientists are supposed to do is improve on ideas that have been out there. And so when you throw an idea out there, usually it's not the first time that idea has been pitched somewhere, right? I mean, I think it was Solomon that said, King Solomon, there's nothing new under the sun, kind of a thing. And so you got one of those things going on. And the value of an imperfect idea is that it gets other people thinking about the idea still, gets other people talking. Well, what was wrong with it? What needed to be improved? How would we do it better? And then all of a sudden, they do. There is something better that comes of it. So even an imperfect project, even an imperfect research design, even an imperfect poem or song or whatever it is, get someone else thinking in a way that, okay, I can work with this, I can make this better. And that's a good thing. We can't think of those as threats. We have to think of those as good things that come from those types. Yeah.
Well, in music, there's a concept that goes back to like modal jazz and improvisational jazz. Is there's no bad note, there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Like, so if you think about fusion and modal jazz, there are examples. Like, give an example, like Herbie Hancock was playing with Miles Davis. The song they were playing, he hit a chord that wasn't part of the original composition. And
Mm.
Davison immediately, in real time, changed his part to match Herbie's part, right? And didn't go and stop the song, right? Actually, evolved the part and actually just found the note. Now, the audience didn't even perceive there was a problem. And Herbie writes about it in that it made him start realizing that he could be in the present moment and not fall into the perfection trap, which I think
You know,
applies to a lot of things because there's a lot of things in science that are happy accidents. Like aspartame was a happy accident.
right? Many
There's
happy
all kinds of
accidents.
things. There's tons of that. I mean, that's the one that everybody knows, but
Yeah, I'm even what was it? The guy's name, the artist who was always on public television with the big puffy hair, Bob
oh,
Ross.
Bob
His
Ross.
name was Bob Ross. He always said, they're happy. He always called them happy accidents. Like you said,
Yeah.
there's no such thing as an accident. It's a happy accident. And I love what you just said a minute ago because I think it's worth repeating. And that's most of the time when a mistake is made, especially by somebody with a decent skill set, like Herbie Hancock obviously had a decent skill set, So, when somebody makes a mistake or when they make a mistake, usually the only people that know that are the people themselves. And the
Hmm.
only ways people recognize that is if you stop and point it out.
Yeah.
And
If you
when I
stop,
do
if you
public
stop the
speaking,
song, you'll know.
exactly. It's the same thing with public speaking. I can't tell you how many times I've been on the stage and I'm going somewhere and telling a story, making my point, whatever it is, and I make a mistake and nobody knows it because they don't know what I was going to say, where I was
Yeah, they
going.
don't
I
have your
forgot a
script.
point.
They don't have
Yeah,
your script
exactly.
ahead of time.
So they only know if I'm like, "Oops, sorry, I was supposed to say this." It's like, no,
You don't
just
have to
keep
say
going.
that. You don't have to
Exactly
do.
right. Exactly right. So,
Most people are
back
so
to your happy
self-deprecating.
accident story. It's the even this book becoming epic,
Yeah.
and you mentioned early on the cancer survivor and all that, and I had no intention and zero intention to write this book. It wasn't a
Mhm.
thought in my head. It wasn't an idea in my head. It was just during radiation. I did 38 days of radiation, and those 38 days, you have to be there every day without fail, same
Mhm.
time. You go through the thing. And so I had to cancel a bunch of stuff because I just had to be home and you get up, I don't want to explain how mundane and mind numbing that is, but it's not a fun thing to do. The radiation itself is not painful per se, but it's just an incredible inconvenience. So anyways, I find myself trapped at home and not wanting to be depressed, not wanting to be non-productive. I set myself a personal goal of, you know what, I'm just going to journal. I'm just going to just write, like
They
free
gave you
writing,
an
really.
opportunity, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to free write 1,000 words every day for these 38 days. And so I did that, and come around day 4 or 5, I found myself in a stream in this. I didn't even know I was heading that direction. I started looking at what I was writing. I'm like, hey, there's something here. And it was
Mhm.
in that creative process that the concept of epic just illuminated to me. And I began to write about, all right, being excellent, being perceptive, inspired, compassionate. And then from that, a book came that was quite literally a happy accident. But that's what you were describing earlier, how the creative process really goes. You've got to do it. To,
Yeah, it's kinda like you gotta be in it, and, a lot of times it's like the Victorians had the idea of the muse,
right.
and I always felt and I was always into William Blake and Tennyson and Wordsworth and
Okay.
all those guys because I'm a songwriter, but poetry kinda is a little bit of a precursor before you
Absolutely.
become a songwriter. You kinda get into the scheme of things and the structure, but, the idea of, like, artists can channel, and what we do is, like, I think it's a synthesis of what's inside and what's outside,
Mhm.
and really great creators are able to synthesize that in a kind of a way that is, it's like your talent. That's the talent of a painter, of a musician, of an author, of any kind of discipline, is that you figure out, and sometimes it just comes from like the
Right.
muse kind of structure. It kind of like a download. People call it like a download today. The Victorians called it the muse, but it's like this
Right.
idea, like sometimes you get this thing and you're just in it, and it
Yeah.
just
It's almost like
happens.
a revelation. Yeah.
Yeah, And it's also interesting, like in Epic, that you have compassion because we kind of live in an age that seems kind of maybe like a little less compassion. They like we got these tech bros and podcast bro, these bro kind of culture. There's like, oh, we gotta stick it to this group, stick it to that group, and a
Right.
lot of resentments. And to me, I kind of I'm a child of the '70s, so I grew up with a different perspective, kind of like coming off the hippie culture, and I was like enamored with like the Beatles
Right.
and the Doors and the things that I had missed as a kid because I've grown up in the '70s. I'm like a tail end of like Morrison's gone, Hendrix is gone, like Jansen's gone, but I'm kind of growing up with knowing their legends as a kid. It's like these guys, so it's a different perspective.
Yeah.
There seemed to be more willingness to experiment or to consider things or not to be so narrow minded.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, like I say, that's where the compassion is a neat part of that, and I love the fact that it worked out great. That compassion is the end of the story. You work on excellence, you work on perception, you work on inspiration. And everything we're talking about fits into those frameworks. Well, my entire section in that book on inspiration is all about innovation, creativity, what you have to do, who you surround yourself with. I make the point even in the book that which you already made, we have to surround ourselves with people who are better than us. And when we do that, that's when inspiration strikes. Perception is about this idea that I kind of call contextual intelligence. Other people have used that term as well, but I mean it as, diagnosing your environment, taking it in. You just used an example of one of the things that creative artists do better than most is they somehow can connect the external world with the internal. They see connections there that other people really don't see. That's all about perception, right? What am
yeah,
I seeing? How am I seeing it? How
observation.
Exactly. How can I articulate this? Whatever the medium is, if it's music, if it's art, if it's dance, whatever, if it's writing, whatever it is, because that's the other thing is I don't really write a lot of poetry. Well, I don't write any poetry or something like that. I write in a specific space. But
Hmm.
one of the things that's really neat about what I do is I take ideas based on observations of how I see and experience life and success and failure and those other things and kind of bring it into a language that
Yeah,
speaks
frame. You
to
kind of frame it
exactly
because everybody has their own lens. Because I was talking
right,
to a filmmaker, and the cool thing about filmmaker, they kind of told me is like it's a team sport. Everybody talks about the director, but the director actually worked with the producer and the lighting team and the script writers and all these teams. And for it to work right, I was talking to this indie film producer. It's like for a scene to work, that team all has to be kind of like all there, like a play, like a play in sports, or
right,
like a musician. And when they're hitting that note, it's like it has to all work, and it's a lot of teamwork. And it's actually knowing who to put on that team and knowing there are people that are like exceptional in this area, right?
right,
That you're not the master of lighting, you're not the master of the of the actual camera work, but
right.
you know what people to put on the field, put in that room to
That's right.
get to that scene. And
But
that's
I
how
know
life
who
is.
is.
Like you gotta, like you said, if you just have everybody that's just gonna be subordinate to you, right? And you don't want anybody that has any kind of skill set that's like could outshine you, then you're going to be a lesson in mediocrity.
Exactly right. That's what mediocre people do. They protect themselves by setting that up around them, and that they're the boss, so to speak. You can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get an innovation like Apple Computer or like an innovation like where we are with like AI, with like Open AI or all these.
Exactly.
These not come from somebody just playing it safe. Like the
Rick
things that
can't do it.
happen is like on the outer edge of the bell curve is like the people who push it. Now, at first, when you push it, most people come back and will say they hate it, but that doesn't matter to a pioneer.
Right.
Pioneer doesn't care. It's like if you hate it.
Exactly right. We're going somewhere no one's been before. That's the whole point. And that's an excellent point because there are a lot of creatives out there who have the ability and capacity, but fear going into that unknown space because of the backlash but then there's at some point, and I don't know when this is, But at some point, I believe everybody who's produced something valuable gets to that place where, all right, I've got to go push beyond the comfort, the proverbial
Comfort zone.
comfort
Yeah.
zone, you
Yeah.
know?
Because the comfort zone, I think, comes from, I'll go into this idea of safety and kind of really human like evolution is like if when we're in the clan in the tribe, right, back in the day, whether you're out in the woods or in the cave or in the savannah, whatever, wherever you are, like if you weren't with the group and they output you as an outcast, you could get killed.
Right.
So the idea of doing something outside the group structure or something that's not the norm could get you killed. And that still is going on in your brain, like in your subconscious, like brain, you're trying to stay safe, but it keeps you mediocre if you stay too
Exactly.
safe.
Exactly. And it totally does. And that's really the challenge, I think, right? That's the challenge with creating anything of value. And again, no matter the medium, no matter the industry, no matter the discipline, it's the a willingness to be a risk taker, and then of course, by taking a risk, we don't mean just be cavalier and or anything like that. It just they're calculated risks.
Yeah.
Your stuff, where you're going, you have an idea, and as you're pushing that idea, if it's like most ideas in life, it will change on you as you're going, right? You feel like you've got a handle of whatever it is you're holding, and all of a sudden it changes in your hands as you're moving forward. You can't be scared of that transition. You can't be scared of that change. And that's when we begin to see, okay, this thing is changing. What am I going to do? Well, it looks like it's taking me in this direction. And, one of the things I love to say about this, and I talk about this in Becoming Epic as well, is the idea of passion. You mentioned the chapter or the section. I have a whole section on compassion. And if you talk about those words, com is the Latin prefix for with, right? And then so
Mhm,
if you break the word apart, it's actually compassion. And we
mhm.
we love the concept of passion, especially Americans. We love that idea of I want to pursue my passion, I want to develop my passion, I want to know my passion. We're all about passion, except there's two important things here. First thing is I don't believe we know what our passion really is until later in life. Okay. And the reason for that is because we haven't pursued our curiosity enough. When I talk to young leaders or young professionals, one of the things that I tell them about, well, I want to do my passion. And they talk about their passion. And I ask them, well, what is your passion? And they give me some cockamamie answer that doesn't really make sense or isn't really a thing. And I'm like, you don't really know what you're passionate about yet because you haven't pursued the things that make you curious. And I am a
Mhm.
huge advocate for before you understand passion and start talking about what you're passionate about, you have to pursue what makes you curious. And it's in the process of pursuing those things that make you curious or that you find curious is when you discover your passion. So passions aren't found, they're
Like,
discovered.
yeah, it's like an idea is like, I'm a synthesist, right? So I work with synthesizers and sound design. And a lot of what we talk about in sound design is newfound sound.
Yeah.
So because there's existing sounds like a Steinway. Hey, there's like, a Stradivarius, a Hammond B3. What
Yeah.
I work with is taking like a square wave or a triangle wave or a sine wave and making a sound that doesn't sound like anything that's been here before.
Wow.
Now that is this idea that you're going to go and do things, and my passion is an experimentation, and I found a way to kind of left right brain. In my day job, I work with design, software
Mm-hmm.
design. In my creative space, I work with podcasting with creative people and art and music and the sound design. And so the idea, like, I don't know where it's going to go.
Right.
Right. And the passion is that I like being in a form where I can go, it could apply to jazz, it could apply to punk rock, it could apply to classical, apply whatever. I don't have to be stuck in any one genre and I could
Right.
go in different directions. And that in itself, I found very early was my passion is I like to kind of go into those unknown spaces or the newfound sound or the newfound art or thing that was not typical.
Right, but you're describing the process of experimentation. Basically, what I hear you saying is I'm experimenting every day.
Yeah, all the time.
And it's that experimenting every day that I find these new sounds and I see, hey, this is useful for this genre, for that genre. And it's the same thing in life as well. It's just about our dreams, our hopes, our aspirations, our happiness, joy, all of those things. It's the same thing. You're not going to actually find, I believe, this is my belief. I don't believe you're actually going to find what you're describing as, this, I get joy and fulfillment from this, unless you're willing to do kind of what you're describing. And that's experiment more,
Yeah, the
and
thing is, like, our society tends to not, like, reward experimentation. They reward people who are able to be redundant
right,
and be able to create, like, I know this algorithm's always gonna get 1,000 views, 500 likes, or it's gonna get a million views, or
right,
you're gonna have this secret sauce, and then everybody's gonna use the same sauce, and everybody's doing the same thing. Even though we say we're individuals, we tend to, you
we're
know,
not,
we
we're not,
tell people that, oh, you should be, an accountant.
right,
You should be on the factory floor and do that widget. That
right,
success is doing that. And when we really, what people tend to find when they hit the wall, especially during a pandemic, people hit the wall and it's like, I don't like being in the commute for 2 to 3 hours a day.
right,
I don't like having to go into this in this cube all day. Then
right,
maybe I want to go back to my childhood and I wanted to write a play, or I
right.
wanted to write a book, or I wanted to actually have a service and I wanted to go be a coach, or I wanted, and maybe I can now explore that. And so that kind of bad situation of the pandemic gave people an opportunity to kind of dive deep, look at the looking
Totally.
glass self, and then say, hey, what is it that I want to do?
Yeah,
Maybe I
there was
don't
a
know,
huge
but maybe I
silver
should
lining.
try.
Yeah, there was a huge silver lining with the pandemic that I don't think is being talked about enough. Obviously, it was a horrible tragedy, and I know,
Mhm.
all that. But still, there are some things that came from that. I know I'm doing what I'm doing now because of the pandemic. I was a traditional, brick and mortar professor, faculty member, and I still teach at a large university, but I'm a remote faculty now. I teach in Miami, Florida, and live in Toledo, Ohio.
Yeah.
So crazy things like that, which I can do now. And it was the pandemic that made that possible. And this idea of going into that space, doing those things, taking those risks, I think is absolutely fundamental to success in the creative space. And we were talking about passion, and with passion, and so we understand that passion. The second part of passion is not just pursuing curiosity, those things that make you curious. You pursue the things that make you curious, and in the pursuit of that, you find your passion or discover it. The other part of passion that a lot of people forget, especially in our day and age today, is when you study out the word passion, it actually means pain and suffering.
Yeah.
You know,
If
so I
writers
mean,
artists
yeah,
know that.
we're in the Easter season right now, right? And so it wouldn't be strange for people to talk about the passion of the Christ. They say
Mhm.
things like that. And well, what does that mean? I mean, because that wasn't a fun thing,
Oh, you have
as
to go
everyone
through it.
before,
Well, the
right?
it
It was pain and suffering. That's the pain and suffering of
well,
Christ.
that's the note of an artist. Like,
Yeah,
every artist that you actually start to look at, like film, writing, art, usually there's some kind of deep pain that
yeah,
is expressed, or some passionate, like, some emotion, sadness, melancholy,
yep,
pain, regret, remorse. A lot of the greatest pieces of art
yep.
come from those spaces. Now, there's
The
stuff that
greatest
has
book,
joy,
the greatest
yeah, there's joy,
poetry,
but a lot of times it's going through the suffering that brings the joy,
right,
that ultimately gets to the, you might have movements in certain types of, like, forms that go from being sad to being elated to being
right.
whatever. It moves around, in, like, big pieces of classical music, you can feel it. You can see that in opera, you can see it in all kinds of forms, but you have to go through it. There's
Exactly
something you
right.
have to go through.
And that kind of why I mentioned that kind of culminates my whole idea of becoming epic, because I don't believe you can call yourself epic, or be epic and live that epic life if you with suffering, calm passion with the pain, with the suffering. And that's what somebody who's epic does. They have the pain, they have the suffering, they appreciate it. It's not like we're not talking about enjoying it and all this kind of stuff,
Yeah,
but you
yeah.
turn it into
Turn
something
it into a
beautiful.
cathartic. But it's cathartic.
Exactly right.
I think a lot of artists, they take the pain that they've experienced, and they because they have that artistic, like, vision, that they're able to turn it into a piece of art instead of sitting there and being frustrated. Like, people who aren't artists, they have all these emotions and they'll push them down, right? And they'll try to lock them in a box. And
Right.
artists will open up that box, experience it, and then try to turn it into that piece of art and actually move through it and get into it and get beyond it to the other side of it, right? And actually did, like, it's almost like you're going to a psychoanalyst or something. You've gone through it, you've expressed it, and now you've actually kind of like understood where you were, and now you're here,
Right.
right? And that's that. I think everybody can do that to a certain degree if they don't put the blinders on,
Well,
you know.
exactly right. And that's what they can't do is, cover their face and be like, I'm not doing this. I can't see it, which is what most people do. And even in my own story that I was sharing a little bit ago of this whole, even the book Becoming Epic came from a season in my life when I was what I consider to be one of my lowest seasons. I mean, my diagnosis was advanced metastatic prostate cancer. So it's
Mm.
like, it's one thing you hear prostate cancer at first, and my doctors were like, thank God, this is the good kind of cancer, if there is
You can
such a
solve it,
crazy
yeah.
thing, right? This is the easy one. And then only a few weeks later, after a few more tests and follow-ups, are like, oh,
This is a harder
guess
one.
what? Yeah, it's advanced, it's at stages, it's metastasized. It's like, yeah, this is way worse than we ever thought. So now we've got to do all these treatments that we weren't planning on doing, and that makes a person really face some of their the mortality
Mortality. Yeah,
and issues,
mortality.
right,
That's a
and
hard
the
thing to deal with.
quality of your relationships, all those kinds of things are all of a sudden I'm forced with them. And what I thought was interesting in this creative process for me was the stories that I did tell, the stories that I didn't want to tell and ended up telling but didn't want to. The reason I didn't want to is because they they required vulnerability on my part. There were things that I
Vulnerability.
had to do, that things I had to say that just were, embarrassing and emasculating, and the embarrassing stories, because when you have prostate cancer, what comes with that are things like incontinence, for example, and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And
Yeah.
so, and I didn't want to tell people about the first time I had to go buy adult pull-ups, and
Yeah.
how
I mean, we had the
embarrassing,
cancer. Yeah,
humiliating that
you're
is.
vulnerable. Like, your body
Exactly.
is not listening to you, right?
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
there are things you can't control, and it feels like a little bit of shame. You feel embarrassed. If you're a man, you feel like, "I don't have control over my
Right.
body,"
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
you're
it's
supposed to be,
emasculating, it's
yeah, you get
humiliating,
emasculated,
and it's
you
no fault of my own. I mean, I've got
yeah.
cancer, and I had to take out my prostate, and they had to take out a bunch of other stuff, and the huge surgical thing, and I'm wearing bags and tubes and all these kinds of things, and it's like, why are you embarrassed about this? You shouldn't be. I mean, you're lucky to be alive, kind of a thing. But it didn't help. I was still embarrassed, and so
Mm.
those are stories that I didn't want to tell. Well, I end up writing about those in my book, in my blogs, and other spaces. And you wouldn't believe, maybe you would. Most people don't believe, I should say this way, I didn't believe the positive feedback that I've got, and how that's the valuable story. I had these great points about overcoming adversity and having the right mental attitude and all that kind of stuff, right? That's what I wanted people to know and love about it. And they're like, yeah, that was good. But what really touched me was when you told that story about going to the store, is when you told the story about how embarrassed you were. It's like, really? That's what touched
Well,
you the
that's
most?
the thing that you find out as a writer, and when you start
Yeah.
writing and your vulnerability comes out, especially like
Yep.
songwriters, our secret sauce is being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like the classic songwriter that tells a story, it's usually about a vulnerability. in some way.
Yeah,
And it's
absolutely.
usually somewhat personal. You might be like Dylan and create a character about it, but it's
Yeah,
still like you. Right? Like even everybody knows it's still about you. I mean, his greatest album, Blood on the Tracks, it's supposed to be about his divorce, but he has like these third party characters, but people still knew it was about his divorce.
right, right.
So he's still, even though he might layer it, it's still about like a tragic thing, a divorce. And
Yeah,
so this idea of the vulnerability is that's what people look for. And
right,
the problem within the artist trap is sometimes like, what if you're happy? Like James Taylor ran into a problem where his writing was like, I seen fire, I seen rain. People kind of liked his kind of like songwriting when he was actually having a hard time in life. He
right,
was an addict. He was having a lot of trouble, but he had his great success when he was at his like lowest point personally. When he got to a point where he was happy, he did an album and it didn't sell well
right.
because people didn't identify his type of lyrical ability with happiness. They identified it with sadness. So, like, do you want to get stuck in that trap where, like, the only way
Yep.
people identify you is when you're going through the bad times? I mean, that's something that some artists have to figure out. Like,
Yeah,
well, how do
it's
I
like
navigate
C.S.
that?
Lewis has a very similar story. He wrote the book. He's famous for many books, but one of the ones is The Problem of Pain. And when he's talking about that, he's talking about his own issues with love, romance, wrestling with the realities of life as it is, and people identify with that, right? I mean, and that's so important. Artists do it, musicians, poets, and that's incredibly powerful, and that's something that you don't want to. I mean, you get to a certain space, and you're obviously been in that space and that realization a lot longer than I have. But I'm to this place now where, man, I've written some other good stuff, but nobody wants to read that stuff. Or at least I think it's good stuff. I should say that. I
Yeah,
should
that's
qualify that.
the artist probably trap is sometimes the thing you think that everybody wants is like you're too close to it, and the people actually like what maybe you don't think
Right.
is going to work. And so
Yeah.
sometimes we're not the best critics of our own work because like if we it was up to us, we'd be marketing the wrong thing.
You're 100% right, and that's exactly what I'm learning is, why do people now pay interest or pay attention to me when after they found out, oh, he's going through this horrible disease and this mental challenge and the treat all this kind of stuff and the impact that it has. It's like, why is all of a sudden now this happening? And you're exactly right. I love that point. I'd be marketing the wrong thing for sure, but it's valuable, and that's what being epic is all about to me. And when you get to the end of that process, it's really about that compassion. And again, when you break it down with pain and suffering, and to me, that means doing the hard thing. I mean, somebody who's truly epic, they're excellent. Yes. They are perceptive. Yes. They see things that other people see. They recognize those things. They're inspired. They have people around them who can inspire them. They put themselves in the right context or setting to be inspired, but then they also do the hard thing. They embrace and they walk with the pain and suffering. And when you do that, the quality of your life, the quality of your products, whether they're songs, poetry, books, art, dance, whatever it might be, what comes from that is something that enriches other people so that they can begin their epic journey. And that's really what it's all about, helping people get to that place. And I think that's a
Yeah,
rewarding piece as well.
there's the idea of like anti-fragility that
Yeah.
I think we've kind of been kind of touching on, but it's like it seems to be a combination of like understanding like that vulnerability and leveraging your adversity and unknown things and complexities and telling a story that is like that people can resonate with, because I think that reason people resonate with vulnerability is because we're human beings and we
Right.
all have been in that place. So when you're willing to show that light, shine that light, then it makes people you seem more accessible. You seem more
Yeah.
authentic, right?
Yeah, it's the modern day equivalent of the bravery. And I think we don't have dragons to slay anymore. Literal dragons, things like that. So the tales that we tell about bravery, having really a lot of them have to do with overcoming these internal giants, these variables, these things in our lives that require us to be vulnerable and face our humanity. And people who can do that are now counted in our society and culture as the brave among us, because a lot of people don't want to do that hard job of even admitting and talking about their vulnerabilities. And I think that's one of the things, again, that really goes toward developing or becoming epic. And even the title "Becoming" is a process. It's an ongoing thing, and that's
Yeah,
one of the
nobody's
things that's
ever
really
fully
important.
done. Like a lot of
Right.
times, like I always think, like with like artists, what you really, if you admit it to yourself, you're not done till you're not here, right? A lot of it, like you think about a bluesman, like if somebody who plays the blues, like in Mississippi or Texas blues, they tend to, it's not a young person game. You
Right.
keep on playing the blues until you're gone, and like you don't stop as long as your fingers can play the fretboard. You keep on going until you're not here. I mean, all the great bluesmen, they kept on going until they weren't around. There was no expiration date because they still
Right.
always had something to say, somewhere to go.
Yep.
And that's where people, I think, they sell themselves short. Is they feel, oh, there's an expiration date to this thing, and maybe in
Or
sports
even
there
worse
is.
than that is there's a belief that there's a final destination point. I've achieved, I've made it. And once they're there, then if you truly believe that, you're not going to continue to produce quality work.
Yeah, because if you feel like you still can put it in, like the Stones don't stop.
Right.
Like they kept
Yeah.
on going because they kind of came from like blues, right? The
Mhm.
blues doesn't have an expiration date. Like so you can keep on doing it, doesn't stop. But if you're like a pop star, there's an expiration date because like nobody wants to see an 80-year-old pop star, but an 80-year-old bluesman, nobody has a problem with that.
Right. And they actually respect that person more because they actually have life behind their words, behind their lyric.
Yeah, so you have to kind of look, what game are you in? Like, what are you doing? Is it a game, or actually, do you believe it's your life?
Right.
Like if you're actually just playing a role, then you're not. Are you really into it, or is it just like you're playing with like images, you're playing with masks, or is it really you?
Right.
You know?
And people want to see the real you. The people they want to experience what it is you've done. They want to know, um, they want to believe that you've walked in their shoes. And the second you can do that, this is true for leadership. This is true for any industry, any space. If the people around you believe that you have walked in their shoes, they will be a friend and a companion for life. And that's when we truly learn to influence people, make the differences in people's lives, and be the leaders we want to be the artists we want to be the impact that we want to be. Because all of us want to leave an impact, right? We want to make an
Mhm.
impact, and all these things we're talking about, I think, tie right into that. And I think the crux of what we've said today, bringing that down, is it really centers on vulnerability. Now, there's other aspects that we talked about for the last, almost an hour now, but there's other aspects there. But vulnerability is a big, big part of that.
And I think leadership, like the role for leadership going forward in the world is like some people felt maybe it's like a top down bureaucratic structure, like it's like a pyramid. But a lot of times, what you find that if you come from like you're taking everything from even from the floor, like if you're doing like tech or doing engineering, and if you don't listen to the guys on the floor to actually put together your design, because you're thinking I'm in the ivory tower, I went to Carnegie Mellon, I'm the guy on the floor, he doesn't know anything. But the guys on the floor, like if you go like to Japan, I lived in Japan for a couple of years, and like on a Toyota floor or Honda floor, they listen. The engineers listen to the guys putting the things together. They don't say, "Well, you don't have a degree." They'll actually take the
Right.
feedback and say, "Hey, maybe this doesn't work." Even though I've got the doctorate in engineering, like the guys on the floor say it's not working. You
Right.
know?
Yeah. And that goes back to vulnerability, because again, it requires a certain amount of vulnerability to even take that input. And I think that's so critical. And all these concepts and ideas that you mentioned a minute ago, anti-fragility, it's a favorite topic of mine as well. And this idea of when you are vulnerable, when you do embrace the difficulties of life, how does that impact you? And we hold on the pedestal the idea of being resilient, and being resilient is good, but it only really gets you back to your original point, your point of origin. You have cancer, and so you go through this journey and you're hoping just to bounce back. And I can't tell you how many times my wife and I have said to each other, I just want things to be back the way they were. I just want things to be back the way they were. And that's really, short-sighted, because the real idea here, and of course we always correct ourselves, and we're a good team with that, but it's like, I don't want to go back to the way we were. I want to be better than how we were.
Yeah.
And
You
we
want to
would
be
have
like,
never, right. We would have never done the things that we're doing to be better had this not happened. So this isn't, a bad thing per se. I mean, we were going to let it make us better than what we were. And we've got to engage with that process, because we believe that all things work to good, and for our ultimate good. And I believe that means we become better adversity and trials of life, not just trying to make it through the adversities and trials of life.
well, I think the crucible moments kind of make the person, right? If they take a lesson and they learn from it. If you don't learn from it, then you might get stuck in the loop.
You're going to do it again. Exactly right.
Yeah. So, but if you for me, the cancer I had, the person pre-cancer, I would not be on the mic. I wouldn't have gone to Japan. There's a bunch of stuff I wouldn't have done. And post-cancer, I said, why not? I survived it. So why not? Why am I scared of going on a mic? Why am I scared of going to Tokyo? Like, just go do it. And so it wasn't like it was a reckless thing. It was like it was an opportunity, but I was like scared of the opportunity. So if you put yourself in places where like the fear is not going to overcome your curiosity,
right.
So then you can push, and you kind of like wade into the deep water. You're not going to drown, but you can wade in and you can go back to, you're actually going to survive it.
Yep. I think that's a beautiful point, because the things that happen to us in life actually change our filter. And, the pre-cancer filter and the post-cancer filter, are different things now. And like you, I'm very similar in the sense that I'm trying things I wouldn't have tried before. Evaluating opportunities in a different way than I would have before. My metrics for success, the rubric that I use to determine if something is valuable or not valuable, is different now than it was before. And that has a lot of scary consequences, not just for me, but for like my wife and my kids,
people
my
around
family.
you. Yeah.
Like, that's not, Dad, you would never do that before. Or that's not how you evaluated this before. It's like, hey, it's different now.
It's a different time.
And we have to embrace those aspects of ourselves. And that, you mentioned this earlier on in our conversation. That's what makes us who we are. That's what makes us unique. That's what gives us our unique fingerprint in this world, are the things that we experience, how we filter them, and how we leverage them. And I would hope that, becoming epic, and if our journey, and I believe, hopefully, I can see your listeners really are about, I want to become epic. Well, the thing I would say to them is, you have to embrace both aspects of life. Don't just look for the joys and the pleasures and the happiness part, but understand that the difficult things that happen to you, are also for your benefit. Mm-hmm. I know that sounds crazy to say, but it's true. And if we can do that, then we can truly become epic.
Well, that's the whole point of life, is like, it's not going to be just a calm ocean, because I don't know if I want a captain that's never gone through a rough sea. You kind of have to, you don't want a manager that's never had a hard time, like, dealing with budget issues. Is like they never had a deficit. They never had a problem. It's the problems are what makes you human. Like, what gives you that reason to get up in the morning is you got a challenge. The challenge is what makes us, I think. And
I believe that 100%. It's those challenges, and as they've always said, when you preparing for something without having trial or trouble is that's the easy part. I mean, who you really are is how you respond in the stress, in the pain, in the trouble. And that's when you know what's really in there. That's when you know what comes out. And like you, I don't want to be, working with someone who's never had to overcome any adversity. I want that, and I'm willing to mentor people like that. But when I'm talking about putting my life in someone's hands,
Yeah.
I want to make sure that they've landed a few rough landings.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've done those kinds of things.
Yeah,
That's
because
for sure.
that you don't want a pilot that's never had to deal with coming in a windstorm or
Right.
dealing with like
Yeah.
all
Who's
the things
only
that
ever
can happen.
been in the simulator? Don't
He
give me
hasn't been in the real deal. He hasn't
right.
done the work. It's like they back in the World War II in the foxhole. Was like, you want the captain that it's never been under fire?
Right. Exactly right.
Probably not.
Right.
You don't want the
Exactly right.
commander just like not doesn't know what to do when they're under fire. It's like, well, we don't want to choke. Don't choke on it, please.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that apply. I mean, that message applies so many spaces, and even the creativity space. I mean, with art, I mean, it's the same kind of thing. I mean, what we just said this: the poetry, the songs, the
Yeah.
books, the all that stuff that has value and lasting meaning. I mean,
Mhm.
that have lasted for decades, centuries, maybe even. It comes from those types of experiences, and that's really what we're after, and that's what people want to see, and that's what it means. What epic is about.
So if people go to your website, Dr. Matt Kutz, .com, what is that how they get in touch with you and how to connect with all your books that you've written?
Yeah, that's the best place to go. drmattkutz.com. Also, you could use the full name matthewkutz.com. Takes you to
Mm,
the same page. So I have
okay.
both domains. And that I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, Dr. Matt Kutz, and
Mm.
both social spaces. And you can access all my books there. I've written 8 different books. So there's a lot of books there on different topics. So I'd love to be able to help you out.
Well, I want to thank you for being on the show today and let everybody know that link will be fully clickable. We've been live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We will be on other platforms like Apple Podcast, Spotify Video Podcast, iHeartRadio, Amazon Video Podcast later by tomorrow. And we'll send a landing page is what we do is we create a landing page and we'll send that to you. But we'll also give you all the individual links so people can just choose whatever platform they're comfortable with. But I want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Ghost podcast.
It's been a blast for me. Thanks. Great conversation.
Well, thank you and have a great night.
You too.